Imagine standing on the deck of an enormous ship, feeling the wind in your face, the sound of the ocean below, and the sense of excitement as you begin a journey across the Atlantic. The Titanic, dubbed unsinkable, was more than just a marvel of engineering. It was a dream realized, an embodiment of human ambition, a symbol of luxury and innovation. On the night of April 14th, 1912, those aboard the grand ship were blissfully unaware that in just hours, history would be made, but for all the wrong reasons. This is the story of how the Titanic, in all its glory, met its tragic fate. We'll walk you through the events, the people, the dreams, and the heartache. From the early days of its design to its fateful night at sea, this is a tale of ambition, human error, and a disaster that would change the world forever. Stick with us as we unravel one of the greatest maritime tragedies in history and discover how it still haunts us today. The Titanic's journey began long before the ship's departure. The early 20th century was a time of immense industrial growth. Ships were getting bigger, faster, and more luxurious. Among the giants of the sea, the Titanic was destined to stand out. It was part of a competition between two rival British shipping companies, the White Star Line and the Cunard Line. The Titanic, built by Harland and Wolff in Belfast, was designed to be the largest, most luxurious passenger ship ever created. At the time of its launch, it was the epitome of elegance, with ornate interiors, fine dining, and state-of-the-art technology. The ship's design aims to offer unparalleled comfort to its passengers, from the wealthiest elites to the common travelers. But behind its gleaming surface, there were fatal design flaws that few truly understood. The Titanic was equipped with 16 watertight compartments, and it was believed that these would make the ship unsinkable, even if one or two compartments flooded. But the iceberg that struck the ship that fateful night didn't just puncture a single compartment. It caused a chain reaction that breached multiple compartments, flooding the lower levels of the ship faster than anyone could have anticipated. The causes of the disaster were more than just mechanical failures. The human element played a key role in the tragedy. There were signs of overconfidence in the ship's design and capabilities. Crew members were not fully prepared for the magnitude of the disaster, and crucial safety measures were overlooked in the race to achieve grandeur. Additionally, the decision to sail at full speed in icy waters, despite iceberg warnings, played a critical part in the chain of events that led to the sinking. The Titanic was not just a ship. It was a venture spearheaded by a range of influential figures, each playing a significant role in the creation and operation of the ship. J. Bruce Ismay, the managing director of the White Star Line, was one of the most pivotal figures in this story. Ismay's ambition for the Titanic was not merely about building a safe vessel, but creating the most luxurious and prestigious ocean liner of the time. He envisioned a ship that would redefine luxury travel and secure the White Star Line's place in maritime history. On the other side, Captain Edward Smith, an experienced but ultimately tragic figure, was the ship's captain. He had spent over 40 years at sea, but his decision to take the Titanic through the ice-laden waters of the Atlantic would become one of the most controversial aspects of the disaster. Despite warnings from other ships about icebergs, Smith was known for his confidence and desire to make the Titanic's maiden voyage a record-breaking event. His failure to adjust course in response to the threat of icebergs would cost hundreds of lives. The preparations for the Titanic's journey were elaborate. The ship's interiors were designed by skilled architects, incorporating lavish touches from first-class cabins to the grand staircase. In the days leading up to the Titanic's departure, thousands of workers had put in months of effort to ensure the ship's readiness. However, these preparations were not without oversight. The lifeboat capacity was far below what would have been needed to save everyone aboard. The design prioritized elegance over safety, leaving many passengers without a way to escape. As the Titanic embarked on its maiden voyage from Southampton on April 10, 1912, the excitement aboard the ship was palpable. Passengers filled the decks, enjoying the luxurious amenities, fine dining, and live music that marked the early stages of the journey. For the first few days, the Titanic sailed smoothly, making stops in France and Ireland before heading across the Atlantic towards New York City. But behind the scenes, there were troubling signs. On the evening of April 14th, multiple warnings came in about icebergs in the area. Ships in the vicinity had reported seeing large masses of ice, and some had even suggested the Titanic slow down. Yet, despite these warnings, the Titanic maintained a full speed of about 22 knots, a decision that would prove to be catastrophic. As the night wore on, the passengers continued with their evening plans, blissfully unaware of the danger. Many in the first-class cabins dined and danced, while others relaxed in the luxurious lounges. On the ship's bridge, however, the situation was beginning to take a turn. The lookouts in the crow's nest had no binoculars, and their visibility was limited. It was a combination of fate and error that led to the moment when the iceberg was first spotted. As the ship steered too close, the iceberg appeared in front of them, with little time to react. At approximately 11:40 p.m. on April 14, 1912, the Titanic collided with an iceberg. The sound of the impact reverberated throughout the ship, and it was immediately clear that something had gone terribly wrong. The ship's hull was breached, and water began flooding the lower decks. Initially, many passengers didn't understand the severity of the situation. It wasn't until the crew began to evacuate the lower decks and move passengers into lifeboats that the magnitude of the disaster became clear. For Captain Smith and the crew, the moments following the collision were filled with confusion and panic. Although the ship's watertight compartments were designed to prevent flooding, the damage from the iceberg was too severe. The Titanic's fate was sealed, and the race against time to save as many lives as possible began. As the ship began to list, those who were aware of the imminent danger rushed to the lifeboats, but there were not enough lifeboats for everyone aboard. The lifeboats that were launched were not filled to capacity, leaving hundreds stranded in the freezing waters of the Atlantic. In one of the most harrowing moments, passengers and crew alike realized that the Titanic was sinking. The ship's grand staircase, which had been a symbol of luxury, was now a scene of chaos as people scrambled for a way to survive. As the ship began to tilt further, the final moments of the Titanic were a devastating spectacle of human desperation. As the Titanic sank into the frigid waters of the Atlantic, the challenges and conflicts that emerged were brutal. First and foremost, the lack of lifeboats became a central issue. While the ship's design had prioritized luxury and speed, it had completely ignored the necessity of sufficient lifeboat capacity. Although the Titanic carried 2,224 people, there were only enough lifeboats for 1,178 people. The policy of women and children first was intended to save lives, but it often led to heartbreaking choices as some families were torn apart. Compounding the tragedy was the chaos aboard the lifeboats. Many lifeboats were launched half-empty as there was confusion among the crew and passengers about who should be allowed to board. The lifeboats themselves were often poorly organized, with some drifting far from the sinking ship, leaving survivors exposed to the harsh cold for hours before rescue arrived. On the ship itself, there were other conflicts that arose in the midst of the disaster. Crew members tried to maintain order, but many were ill-prepared for the scale of the emergency. The first-class passengers, accustomed to privilege, had greater access to the lifeboats, while third-class passengers were often left behind or forced to wait. The division between classes was stark in the final moments, and it underscored the inequalities that existed aboard the Titanic. As the Titanic sank beneath the waves, the survivors faced another grueling challenge: survival. The Carpathia, a nearby ship, responded to the Titanic's distress signals and arrived about 2 hours after the Titanic had gone down. By the time the Carpathia had reached the survivors, the full scope of the disaster had become clear. Of the 2,224 people aboard, over 1,500 had perished in the freezing waters of the Atlantic. The immediate aftermath saw survivors rescued from lifeboats, many suffering from hypothermia, shock, and the trauma of the events they had just experienced. The world was in shock as the scale of the tragedy became known. The sinking of the Titanic dominated headlines across the globe, and investigations into the causes of the disaster began almost immediately. In the days, months, and years that followed the Titanic disaster, the world grappled with its aftermath. In the United States and the United Kingdom, inquiries were launched to determine the cause of the sinking and to prevent future disasters. The International Ice Patrol was established to monitor iceberg activity in the North Atlantic, and new regulations were put in place regarding lifeboats, ensuring that all ships would be required to carry enough lifeboats for everyone on board. The emotional recovery was slower. Families of the victims mourned, and survivors struggled with the trauma of what they had experienced. Some dedicated their lives to preserving the memory of those lost. Memorials were erected, and museums were built to honor the ship and its passengers. The legacy of the Titanic is one of both tragedy and resilience. While the disaster shook the world, it also led to significant changes in maritime safety and regulations. Today, the wreck of the Titanic remains a poignant symbol of human ambition, hubris, and vulnerability. The Titanic's story has been immortalized in countless books, films, and documentaries, continuing to captivate audiences with its haunting tale. But beyond the stories and myths, the sinking of the Titanic serves as a reminder of our responsibility to learn from the past and to always respect the forces of nature. In the end, the Titanic was not just a ship that sank. It was a moment in history that forced humanity to reflect on its own limits, its own dreams, and its own failings. The loss of so many lives left an indelible mark on history, one that we still feel today.